Welcome to the TEFL Training Institute podcast, the bite-sized TEFL podcast for teachers, trainers, and managers.
Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. This episode, our guest is Dr. Marek Kiczkowiak. Marek teaches in Belgium. He runs the TEFL Show podcast, as well as the website TEFL Equity Advocates. In this episode, Tracy and I interviewed Marek about native-speakerism inside the classroom. How do our views and assumptions about native speakers and non-native speakers influence how we teach students? And how does that influence the students and how they use English? Hope you enjoy the interview. So Marek, first question. I think most of the listeners out there will be familiar with the idea of native speakerism outside the classroom and discrimination that maybe non-native English teachers face when they're job hunting. But can you tell us a bit about the other side of native speakerism and how that manifests itself inside the classroom?
At the beginning, when I got interested in it, obviously the first point that you notice is discriminatory recruitment policies. And all the other aspects, I think, have a lot to do as well with teaching English. So if you look at all the major course books, if you look at the pronunciation syllabus, the aim is either to imitate standard British or general American English. This perpetuates the idea that your students have to speak like a native speaker in order to be successful. Of course, course books have been moving forward with a few artificial non-native speaker accents, usually recorded by actors. Actors are trained to imitate voices and accents, so there's a reason why course books do that. It's very sort of perhaps subliminal, you can call it, or subconscious. You know, it's not overt, but I think if for a very long time that's how you learn English, it doesn't surprise me that so many students prefer native speaker voices. I mean, the way we're teaching them, I think, kind of leads them to believe that, clearly native speaker accents are better than non-native speaker accents, right? So that would be one example.
I think I remember when I was students from middle school to high school and to university, maybe 10 years, definitely exposed to either British accents or American accents. So at the end, I really don't know which accent I have.
I mean, it seems clear then for the point of view of schools employing non-native teachers that there's an advantage there, right? That you could get great teachers. But I wonder if you have students that say, I want to learn authentic American English, or I want to learn British English. I wonder what the sort of business argument is to a publisher for saying, you need to include more examples of non-native English.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's another reason why publishers have been reluctant, let's say, to abandon this model where they primarily have American and British accents is that students and teachers might complain. I remember talking at a conference to a coursebook author from a very big publisher, and he said that, they went on a tour to Russia, and he was approached by one of the local teachers, and the local teacher openly told them that we don't like your coursebook because there are all these strange accents in your coursebooks. We want a British accent. I won't buy your coursebook. I had spent years persuading the publisher to finally do this, and now I get this, right? But again, it's probably because those teachers have been educated, right, and teacher trained to believe that British accent is the only accent they should aspire to. And, accent is just one sort of belief and practice, but there are many others. One example would be culture. A lot of people say that native speakers are better teachers because they know the target culture. But again, if you look at research by Ryan Deng, if I remember the names correctly, in these course books, the vast majority of place names, characters, and so on were Western, and the local Chinese students would never be familiar with them. But that leads to a situation where you're kind of, you in order to be successful language learner, you need to learn a stereotypical image of British or American culture. And that, I think, further makes native speakerism seem normal and common sense.
something that Vivian Cook has written about how non-native speakers should not be considered, he calls them failed native speakers. And he says like that you really need a sort of a different yardstick to compare those students again. And I think that's true if you look at the CEFR, probably there's an assumption that if you're a native speaker, you should be at C2 level. Has there ever been any research or about like a different set of standards that are based around something else that do not hold the sort of final goal as being you count as being pretty much the same as a native speaker?
Yeah. I think the difference here that we should make is perhaps not between native and non-native speakers, but between monolingual and bi or multilingual users of the language. Because if you look at second language acquisition research that compares, the research into critical period or compares the proficiency and an intuitive knowledge of grammar, for example, pronunciation, it's usually a group of monolingual native speakers to which non-native speakers are compared. That's a bit like comparing apples and pears, because your monolingual brain is different from my multilingual brain. I might use the language in a different way. And if you were to become, or maybe you already are, a bilingual or multilingual users of English, even if your mother tongue is English, learning those other languages will change your brain. And I remember reading a study where all the monolingual speakers performed completely differently on tests of intuitive grammaticality than those who are bi or multilingual, even bi or multilingual from birth. Because, but we do have this idea that, the monolingual native speaker is at the top. But why should that be? I mean, all of our students will be at least bilingual. That's the goal. We're trying to create people who can operate successfully in two languages. So I think the comparison point should be somebody who already speaks 2 or 3 languages, not somebody who's a monolingual native speaker. If as a non-native speaker, for example, and you're listening to this podcast and you've never felt confident about your identity because, you're a failed copy of a native speaker, you have a foreign accent and so on. I mean, you have to think of yourself as you're a bi or multilingual user of the language. That's absolutely amazing, I think. There are so many people in Britain or the States who have never learned any other foreign language. And equally, if you're a native speaker, and you know other foreign languages, I think your selling point should be not that you're a native speaker, but that you're bi or multilingual user of the language.
I think as a non-native English speaker, I definitely experienced a lot of criticism because I think I totally agree with you, what you just mentioned. Be proud of who you are and what kind of accent you have. And also you can speak more than one language. But in reality, there are a lot of negative information or feedback or criticism just around you. And it just damage your confidence. And you always think, okay, I'm still far away from the standard that people perceived. So do you have any suggestions or something that you think this group of speakers and they can kind of feel more confident or boost their confidence, and what kind of suggestion you want to give them?
Yeah, absolutely. One suggestion, sales pitch starts. You can join TEFL Equity Academy, where I have a course specifically designed to boost your confidence. End of sales pitch. But I think, first thing you have to kind of rethink how you brand market yourself, think of yourself, you really have to, and not just on a superficial level but really deeply believe in yourself, in all the abilities that you have. And you have some amazing superpowers, I think, for starters, that you've learned English. And that can be used as a great selling point, I think, to students. In terms of pronunciation, people will tell you, well, you have a foreign accent. That's bad. Why is that actually bad? I mean, Ross has an accent as well, because that's where he comes from, right? If we're to be honest, the vast majority of our students will never be able to speak like Ross does, for example, right? Because there's a critical...
You probably wouldn't want to, Marek.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they would want to.
The Scottish accent's not particularly desirable, yeah.
But there is a critical period, right? It's kind of an unrealistic model to present them with, whereas you are a successful user of English, and your students can really imitate you, and then they can imagine themselves speaking English as well as you do. If you're told that, well, but you've just made a mistake that clearly, you're not proficient enough. But then there's hundreds of examples of native speakers making what we would call mistakes, right? Just speaking non-standard English. And also, you need to understand as well why native speakers are not better teachers because they are native speakers. A native speaker can be a fantastic teacher, but not because of the first language, but because of the skills and experience and so on. And you really need to understand the sort of the native speaker myth and its different components and why it's not true.
I definitely find myself having that cognitive bias of if I'm listening to a non-native speaker and I hear a mistake, I go, oh, I heard a mistake there. That's interesting. Whereas if you hear a native speaker making a mistake, you just go, oh, it's just part of ordinary spoken discourse that we don't always speak according to grammar. But to go back to the other thing you were saying about, the sort of lack of confidence there, how much of that do you think is down to maybe not just the attitude of the non-native speakers, but the sort of attitude of the, the expat new teacher who's just finished, I'm a native speaker, come and ask me, I'll tell you the answer. And what do you think maybe generally teacher education needs to do to kind of reverse those attitudes?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of truth to that. That as non-native speakers, everything in our profession or industry is probably a better word here, leads us to believe that native speakers are better teachers. We're constantly told that. You go on Facebook and the stuff that you see, you wouldn't believe it. People tell me sometimes, oh, Marek, you're still banging on about the same thing. Why won't you ever stop? I mean, it's over, right? No, it isn't. I mean, go to Facebook and the stuff that you will see, it's just unbelievable. And it's your colleagues, fellow English teachers saying really horrible things about non-native speakers. And you read that and then your students, some of the students might, say those things about you, like they're surprised to see a Chinese teacher at B2 level. In some cases, native speakers as well will have a very condescending attitude that they're kind of the place of birth and the mother tongue gives them the right to correct you all the time. All of that, I think, can really affect your confidence negatively. In terms of teacher training and education, I think there's a lot that needs to change. I mean, at the moment, I can't really see how CELTA or Trinity Cert could ever incorporate that because these are the courses are just too short. It's unbelievable, really. That's, it's a topic for another podcast that we still have 4-week crash courses and we call people after them professional English teachers.
And those are the best courses as well, right? Like that's the other irony. And they're 4 weeks. Yeah.
But I really think that, there should be sessions specifically for non-native speakers to boost their confidence, to really talk about these issues that we've discussed. There should be sessions for everybody to discuss native-speakerism and discuss how it can negatively affect all of us in the industry, how it makes our industry much less professional than it should be. It devalues your qualification, it devalues your experience. The only reason why you might be hired is because you're a native speaker.
And white.
And white, yeah, absolutely. A white native speaker. And I mean, you want to be hired because you're a fantastic teacher, right? And you fit the qualifications. So I think that this
and male, I forgot.
Sorry?
And male.
And male, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's terrible. Final thing on this topic then. We've been using the term non-native speakers. I know Vivian Cook suggested L2 users as a term to use instead. What do you think about the terminology that we use and how does that play into the attitudes?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult issue here because none of the other terms really capture the same meaning, right? If we talk about multilingual teachers, that can be both you and me. I think L1 and L2 users, perhaps it doesn't have the non-prefix. Perhaps it's slightly better, but it's still, in essence, it's still exactly the same, right? When we were writing the book with Robert Lowe, we were very much aware of the fact that on the one hand, we are rallying against, and showing that these terms are subjective, ideological, but then we are using them. So we did try whenever possible to use, for example, multilingual users of the language and so on. Sometimes I think, the terms can be good to draw our attention to the problem. And they do also reflect how some teachers see themselves. I see myself as a non-native speaker of English and a multilingual user of English as well. But I do think that perhaps in professional ELT discourse, be it in job ads, in advertising, but also in teacher training, there's got to be a move away from these issues. Certainly in recruitment, I see absolutely no place for these two terms really, in recruitment and in advertising and so on.
Once again, everyone, that was Marek Kiczkowiak. If you'd like to find out more about Marek, please visit his website, www.teflequityadvocates.com. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
For more podcasts, videos, and blogs, visit our website www.TEFLtraininginstitute.com.
If you've got a question or a topic you'd like us to discuss, leave us a comment.
And if you want to keep up to date with our latest content, add us on WeChat at TEFL Training Institute.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please rate us on iTunes.